You're dressed like a jacket from 1999. Aiden sneered, his voice stretched thin like a razor's edge. The schoolyard cracked open with murmurs. The other boy lowered his head fingers, brushing over the haphazard stitches along the cuff. The indigo had faded silver threads glinting under the midday sun. No one noticed the thin woman in a laundromat uniform standing pressed against the school gate in the distance, watching her son with eyes that held both pride and fear. Her name was Rosa. The boy was Leo. And Aiden Sterling, the only son of Graham Sterling, head of Sterling Capital, nicknamed the Resurrection King for his habit of buying dying companies and turning them into gold mines. Aiden lived among coats fresh from Italian tailors' hands, cars replaced 3 times a year, and a steady stream of praise and shoulder pats. You're the spitting image of your father, except in that moment, he was just a 17-year-old who thought his laughter could never really hurt anyone. Leo didn't answer. He only pulled the zipper of his jacket a little higher. It wasn't from 1999. It was older than that. It had belonged to his father, a construction worker who died when Leo was 8. On chilly nights, Rosa would quietly take it out to air in front of the fan, pressing her face into the worn fabric as if she could find his warmth again. Hey, poor kid in the honors class. Huh. One of Aiden's friends squinted. Leo looked up. His eyes were a warm brown without a trace of anger, only a layer of weariness. I'm here because my grades made it, he said softly. Aiden flicked Leo's collar, a gesture he'd picked up from old movies. Grades can be proven, but your taste in clothes... Let's not. The group laughed. Leo turned away. His shadow seemed smaller as it crossed the wide, endless schoolyard. That night, Rosa sat mending the loose stitches at the cuff. You can let it go, you know, she said quietly. You sew it so well. Leo rested his chin in his hand, then smiled. Better than new. Rosa smiled back, but her eyes stung. The Sterlings were hosting a charity gala for the future of our youth at the Bellington Hotel. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, white tablecloths lay smooth and crisp, and the wine was so expensive that anyone who accidentally read the price might lose their sense of taste. Aiden arrived in a charcoal suit and a wine-red tie. His father, Graham, wore his trademark marble-smooth smile. My son, Graham, said, patting his shoulder, remember to give a little speech about family values. Guests eat that up. Aiden nodded, swallowed a sip of water, and without warning, Leo's warm brown eyes surfaced in his mind. He brushed the image away as one might flick dust from a cuff. The evening was in full swing when the banquet doors swung open. A lone figure stepped in uninvited without an RSVP. Rosa. She stood out like a single wrong note in a polished symphony. A security guard moved toward her, but she lifted a trembling hand holding a gold envelope. I need to speak with Mr. Sterling. Graham's brow tightened. For a moment, every gaze turned her way. Aiden's heartbeat stumbled. He knew that woman. The midday schoolyard flashed in his head like a camera bulb. Bring her here, Graham said, keeping his tone level. Rosa stopped before him. I'm sorry to intrude, but this is a promise you made 18 years ago. She opened the envelope and drew out a yellowed sheet of paper, a handwritten IOU. IOU. I, Graham Sterling, promise to repay $42,600 to Mr. Miguel Alvarez, plus 2% annual interest lent to continue the Harbor Line project. Dated. Signed. The air thickened. Aiden saw his father's signature carved into the paper, as clearly as if it had been chiseled in stone. $42,600 to Graham Sterling now was loose change lost under a car seat, but the old paper pricked like a fine needle straight through skin. Graham smiled thinly. That was a long time ago. Where is Mr. Alvarez now? He was my husband, Rosa said, her voice drifting somewhere between the lights. He's gone. I'm not here for the money. I'm here so my son won't be laughed at anymore. Aiden's chest lurched. Rosa clutched the paper tighter. You told him when I succeed I'll repay the principal and the meaning so your son won't have to wear old clothes to school. Those were your words to my husband. 18 years and we've been waiting. Somewhere a spoon chimed against a glass, offbeat, awkward. Someone coughed. The MC froze. Aiden turned toward the doorway. Leo stood there, one hand gripping his backpack strap, bewildered as a staff member held him back. "Let the boy in," Aiden said before he could think. Leo stepped forward under hundreds of watching eyes. The indigo of his jacket caught the gold from the chandeliers like a drop of ink spilled on pristine silk. Rosa turned, calling softly, "Son." Graham Sterling glanced over the IOU, his voice measured. "What is it you want?" Rosa didn't answer right away. She looked at Leo, then at Aiden, the boy who had mocked her son's jacket that very morning. She drew in a breath. "I want that boy to learn how to apologize. Not to my son, but to his own father for making him forget a debt. And maybe for making him forget himself." It was as if the power had been cut from the entire hall. Aiden felt his knees tremble. That's enough." Graham cut in, the corporate smile sliding back into place. "We don't handle family matters in front of guests." But the guests were no longer guests. They were an audience, and the stage was writing its own script. Aiden looked at Leo again. There was no triumph in Leo's eyes, only discomfort at being in the spotlight. A flush of shame ran from the base of Aiden's skull down his spine. He wished he could rewind the afternoon, hold back the careless joke before it left his mouth. "Let's talk outside," Aiden said quietly. He wasn't sure why, but Leo gave a small nod. They stepped onto the balcony. The night wind brushed against the indigo fabric, skimmed the collar of Aiden's suit. Below them, the city glimmered like an inverted star map. "I'm sorry," Aiden said, quick, concise, but with his gaze steady. Leo pressed his lips together. "It's fine." "No, it's not. I was stupid." Leo looked at Aiden's hand, gripping the railing. "I've hated someone before over a single comment. But then my mom told me maybe the person who said it is hurting somewhere you can't see. I think you might have a hurt like that." Aiden gave a hollow laugh. "The hurt of someone with a closet like a boutique store." Leo shook his head. "The hurt of someone afraid of becoming his father." The air shattered like a bead of dew striking stone. For the first time, Aiden realized someone had just called him by his truest name. That night, after the guests had gone and the bouquets had been stripped apart to save for tomorrow's press photos, Aiden made his way toward the attic. The IOU still gnawed at him, guiding his steps to a door that had been locked for years. He stood on tiptoe to reach the key. The small room smelled of old paper leather jackets and truth. On the wooden desk, among ledgers from the days when Sterling was still a fledgling company, sat a sea-blue tin box. Aiden opened it. Inside, neat stacks of IOUs, names, sums, his father's signature, slips of paper creased by time. He turned them over one after another until he found the line Miguel Alvarez $40,600. Beneath the paper, a photograph slid out. His father, young, not yet streaked with gray, stood beside a broad-shouldered man in a construction hard hat. They were laughing. Behind them, the skeleton of an unfinished work site. The setting sun cast everything in the color of bronze. Aiden sat the photo, trembling in his hands. He remembered dinners where his father spoke of scraping and clawing his way to success, the prices that had to be paid, but never by whom. On the back of the photo, in faded ink, "Miguel, a man who pays his debts on time, and I promise to do the same for you. G. Promise simple, sharp." Aiden closed the box, clutching it to his chest, and went downstairs. His father was sitting alone with a half-empty glass of wine. "Are you going to pay him back?" Aiden asked, his voice steady now. Graham didn't turn. "You don't understand. Back then, we had nothing." He knew the risk. And then things changed. The company grew. People stopped talking about those little things. They weren't little to them. Graham exhaled. "I'll wire the money tomorrow. Happy no dad." Aiden shook his head. "Tomorrow you need to say the promise again, in front of everyone. Not for your image, because I need to see who my father is." Graham gave a thin smile. "Teaching me now, are you?" Aiden swallowed his fear. "No. I'm trying to make sure I don't grow up afraid of who I might become." In the silence, the wall clock ticked on like the footsteps of someone walking away. The next morning, a status went viral across the city's social media. Plot twist: at last night's charity gala, creditor shows up with an IOU. What will Sterling do? Hashtags came down like hail. At the laundromat, Rosa stood before the dryer, hands wrapped around a teacup. "They're going to hate us," Leo said, fingers interlaced. Rosa shook her head. "No. Being poor is only hated in the wrong place by the wrong hearts. In the right place, people only hate those who forget their promises." Leo was quiet. "I'm going to school. Go. I won't hunch my shoulders anymore," he said, voice soft but steady. I'll look up." At the Sterling mansion, Graham sat before the mirror tying his own tie. His hands stalled. He remembered a day long ago when his only tie bore an oil stain. He'd laughed and told Miguel, "One day I'll buy you the finest tie money can get." Miguel had roared with laughter. "A fine tie won't pour concrete, Graham." They both laughed until their sides hurt. Graham stopped, pulled the tie loose, and changed into a plain white shirt. Dad Aiden asked, startled. "I remembered who I used to be," Graham replied, and for the first time in years he walked into his office without the polished mask on his face. The principal proposed holding an open dialogue in the high school auditorium for parents and students, something no one imagined would come from a single mocking remark. Graham agreed. He arrived with Aiden. The hall was packed. Faces of curiosity, anger, hope, all mixed together. Rosa sat in the third row, her hand clasped tightly around Leo's. Graham stepped to the microphone. No notes, no PR gloss. "Last night," he began, "I remembered how much I've forgotten. There are debts that never appear on a balance sheet but weigh on you so long you start to think they're just gravity." He held up the IOU. "This is one of them. I owed Miguel Alvarez $42,600, and I owed his family far more, a thank you never spoken and an apology 18 years late. Today I'm paying it back, but money can't erase everything." He turned to Aiden. "And I owe my son the truth that his father's success stands on bricks laid by hands I never called back to thank. I'm sorry, son." Aiden shot to his feet as if pulled by an invisible string. "I'm sorry, too," he said, looking straight at Leo, "for using my own fear to hurt someone else. I was afraid that if you stripped away the expensive clothes, there'd be nothing left in me worth anyone's respect. That was stupid. I'm sorry, Leo." Leo rose, his ears red with embarrassment. Thank you." The hall buzzed with murmurs. Rosa bowed, her head, tears dripping into her clasped hands. A man stood at the doorway, a package in hand. He was an old postman, someone who had watched the city change its colors over decades. He asked permission to approach the microphone and handed Graham a thick envelope that had been misdelivered for 18 years. "Yesterday, when the news broke, I remembered something in the old storage room. A letter that never got delivered," he said. Graham opened it. Inside was a letter from Miguel, dated 3 weeks before his death. "Graham, I know you'll make it. I'm not in a hurry. Drop by my shop sometime for coffee and let's talk about those leather shoes you keep wearing. They're worn out, you know. Also, if you can do me one favor, if something ever happens to me, let my name be placed in a corner of the new park. Not for me, but for the boy, Leo. So he knows that hands covered in mud can still build a piece of the sky." Graham's breath hitched. Aiden closed his eyes. Rosa covered her face. "We'll name the playground Miguel's Corner," Graham said, his voice rough. "And it will be the first investment from the scholarship fund I'm committing to today, the Alvarez Fund for children whose parents work with their hands. Starting capital, $2 million. Applause, standing ovation, tears. The whole room was a tangle of emotions. But the story wasn't over. Leo raised his hand almost timidly. "Mr. Sterling, I think there's another debt, not yours, but my family's." The hall went so quiet they could hear the sound of clothes shifting against chairs. Leo unzipped his backpack and pulled out a crumpled envelope. "My mom always told me some things shouldn't be said, but I think it's time." Inside was an organ donor card bearing the name Miguel Alvarez. Donor liver consent after death. On the back was a standard hospital thank you letter to the donor's family, along with another handwritten note. "The patient's family wishes to express their gratitude for the gift of life." The recipient's name had been blacked out as per policy. Leo took a deep breath. My dad, after his accident, donated his liver. My mom never knew who got it, but about a year ago, while cleaning the house, I found the original letter, the one the hospital accidentally sent before redacting the name. I read it. He looked up, his brown eyes wet but steady. Graham Sterling. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Aiden's hand instinctively pressed against his chest where his heart pounded like a trapped bird. Graham closed his eyes slowly, then opened them again. He had lived 18 extra years thanks to an emergency liver transplant known only to his family and a handful of doctors. He had never asked or never dared to ask whose it was. Rosa wept silently. Miguel used to say, "If the person lives well, that's the best interest I could ever earn." I kept it secret because I didn't want people to think I was using it to demand anything. Graham stepped down from the stage, kneeling on one knee before Rosa and Leo, a gesture he had reserved in other years only for contracts he failed to close. His voice wavered. I am alive because of your husband. I lived only to forget the promise I made him. I'm sorry. And thank you. Aiden stood behind his father, feeling something inside him swing open like a door to air he had never breathed before. He had mocked a jacket that still carried the scent of Leo's father, while his own father was walking around with a piece of that same man inside him. The thought struck harder than any shame he had felt before. The city spoke of the story the way one speaks of a strange storm arriving without warning, sweeping away things that had hung too long from the eaves, leaving behind a sky that felt clearer. At school, a few kids who liked to mock others simply found something else to laugh at. They always did. But many began doing something different, opening their closets, pulling out extra clothes, and taping a small note to the door. Take if you need. No hashtags, no selfies. Aiden went to Rosa's laundromat. He carried a bag of shirts and a new indigo jacket, not to replace Leo's, but to go alongside it. Could you sew a piece of memory into this for me? He asked. Rosa smiled, her eyes glistening with something deeper than a seam could hold. What kind of memory? A stitch to remind me never let wealth patch over the human part. They both laughed. Outside, Leo was showing two small children customers' kids how to stick star-shaped stickers onto a basket of freshly folded laundry. Miguel's corner in the park was built faster than anyone expected. The bronze plaque was small, unpretentious. A father, a friend, a man who kept his word so we would remember to keep ours. Beside it stretched a row of wooden benches. On their backs, carved in small letters, funded by the Alvarez Fund for the hands covered in mud that built this sky. At the opening ceremony, Graham stood at the microphone, watching the children fidget in line for the slide. He slipped the speech from his pocket back inside and instead told the story of a man in a hard hat who once lent him money when his only tie bore an oil stain, and how that same man had lent him something he could never have imagined: years of life. Aiden and Leo stood side by side, no need for many words. The wind moved through the trees, brushing against the stitched seams of their jackets, one old, one new, making them tremble together. Months later, Aiden invited Leo to speak at a Young Entrepreneurs Club event. Strangely enough, the guest speaker wasn't Aiden, it was Leo. Standing beside him, Aiden gave a brief introduction. Today I want you to hear from the person who taught me that. You can become wealthy by luck, but you only become wealthy in the right way by keeping your promises. Leo stepped up, holding his father's indigo jacket. He spoke about nights when he and his mother cooked soup in a dented pot, about the IOU his mother kept at the bottom of the wardrobe, about the afternoon he was mocked, and the evening he heard an apology. Then he looked straight at the front row where the city's wealthiest young faces sat upright. You might never need anyone to lend you $42,000, but someday someone will give you a chance, a forgiveness, a little more time. Pay it back principle and meaning before you forget who you are. In the stillness that followed, the faint rustle of paper could be heard someone, somewhere, hurriedly writing a note to themselves. Don't forget. One afternoon, when the park had already become part of the neighborhood's daily rhythm, Graham came alone. He stopped before the bronze plaque. From the other side of the fence, a thin old man called out, "Mr. Sterling." Graham turned. The man was pushing an old bicycle, two fresh baguettes in the basket. His smile was bright like someone who'd just stumbled upon something long lost. I worked with Miguel back in the day. We used to joke when you make it big, you've got to come back to the old job site and sing us a song. He loved hearing people sing. Graham chuckled, then froze. He had never sung for anyone except at Aiden's third birthday party. I don't know how to sing, he admitted. The old man winked. Singing badly is still keeping your promise. Graham looked around. The park was bathed in golden afternoon light, children rolling in the grass, laughing. He took a breath, smiling with the awkwardness of a child stepping on stage for the first time. Standing before the plaque, he sang, a simple lullaby his mother used to hum. His voice was rough, the notes often slipping, but each slip seemed to loosen a knot in his chest. When he finished, Aiden, arriving at some point without Graham noticing, stood a short distance away, phone in hand. Not recording video, but playing. A backing track. Not to post online, but to keep the moment. Leo and Rosa walked over to stand beside them. The old construction worker clapped, and soon the whole park joined in. A song didn't need to be beautiful. It only needed to be true. And that was the final twist. Sometimes what stuns people isn't a secret or a fortune, but seeing someone powerful do something clumsy in order to keep a promise to the dead. That clumsiness was beautiful. Winter came. Leo applied to university to study civil engineering. His essay began with a single line, "I want to build skies that carry people's names." He was awarded the Alvarez Fund Scholarship but turned down the generous living stipend. "I want to keep working at my mom's laundromat," he said. Rosa understood there are some things money shouldn't buy. Aiden launched a summer internship program for high school students from working-class families. He called it Stitch Dung Chi and pinned a manifesto on the meeting room wall. If wealth doesn't strengthen the stitch in who you are, it's just fabric waiting to tear. Graham was still wealthy, but each time he signed a contract, he looked at his fingers once rough with cement and asked himself, who is lending me something right now? That question kept him on the right side of his own history, the side of those who remember to be grateful. Don't be quick to judge an old jacket. Sometimes it's warmer than any layer of velvet. Don't be quick to laugh at someone poor because it might be that person or their parents who once lent you the most precious thing you've ever had. In life, we owe each other many debts that never make it onto paper. Opportunity, trust, a piece of liver, a piece of heart, born of kindness. Repay them both principle and meaning. And if you can repay them with strong stitches, an apology given in time, a promise kept awkwardly but sincerely, and the building of skies named for those who helped you stand tall. A twist might make people pause to hear the whole story, but what keeps them there, what keeps us together, is how we treat each other after the truth comes out. Aiden learned. Leo forgave. Graham repaid his debt. The rest is up to all of us. Don't let wealth patch over the human part. Let kindness stitch it tight until it's stronger than any fabric of luxury.